Hello there, welcome. You've found a quiet space tonight, a place far from the ticking of modern clocks, and away from the buzz of schedules and alarms. In this gentle story, we'll drift back into the mists of time, before digital watches and grandfather clocks, before the chimes and the ticking hands, before any mechanical device ruled over minutes and hours. Instead, we'll wander through the quiet dawns and dusks of ancient worlds, where time was felt, seen in the sky, touched in the sand, measured by fire, water, and shadow. So, get comfortable, nestle into your pillow, let your breathing slow, just a little. There's no rush here. We're going to explore how people long ago lived without clocks, how they rose with the sun, told stories around the fire, and watched the sky like an ancient calendar. You don't need to stay awake for all of it. Just listen as we begin to travel, softly, back in time. Long before clocks ticked in halls or wrists bore gleaming watches, people looked to the sky. The very first and most constant timekeeper was the sun. For those in early human societies, the Gatvarus, the foragers, the quiet tribes who wandered forests and plains, the movement of the sun meant everything. Morning came with the golden rising of the light, and it was time to begin the day. Midday was known when the sun stood directly overhead, casting short shadows, and with it came warmth and rest. Evening came softly as the golden orb lowered once more, bathing everything in long shadows and cooler winds. These changes shaped not just when people moved, but how they lived. The earliest people did not rush through life. They watched, they waited, they rose with the birdsong, and they knew, without needing words, that time flowed like sunlight, slow, gentle, rhythmic. Many early cultures named the parts of the day not by numbers, but by what they saw and felt. First light, sun touching the hill, long shadows, time. These were not times you could pin down to a number. They were lived experiences, moments you felt in your bones. And in that way, the sun was more than just a timekeeper. It was a quiet companion, reliable, warm, and always returning. As villages formed and farming began, people needed ways to measure time more precisely. Not everyone could simply follow the rhythm of the sun by instinct. Any more crops needed, tending food had to be shared, and life began to revolve around community. So, early people began to mark time by watching shadows. One of the simplest and most ingenious tools ever invented was the gnomon, a stick or pole planted in the ground. As the sun moved through the sky, the shadow cast by the gnomon moved to. At noon, the shadow was shortest. In the morning and late afternoon, it grew long. Each shift in the shadow's position whispered the passage of time. Soon, these early sticks evolved into sundials. Stone circles were carved with marks, wooden discs bore symbols. All around the world, from ancient Egypt to China, people began building structures that harnessed the sun's dance across the sky. In Egypt, great obelisks served as monumental timepieces. In Mesopotamia, carved tablets tracked shadow length, and in China, great stone sundials measured seasonal hours. Time, still silent and slow, was now being captured in lines and stone. But sundials had a weakness. They could only work when the sun was out. What about cloudy days, or the night? People needed a way to measure time without sunlight, so they turned to other elements, water and fire. One of the earliest inventions was the water clock, or clepsydra. These were simple, a vessel with a hole in the bottom, letting water drip out at a steady pace. As the level dropped, markings on the inside revealed how much time had passed. In ancient Babylon, they were used to time rituals. In Greece, they were used in courts of law. Speakers were given one vessel's worth of time to argue their case. Fire was used too. Oil lamps with measured reservoirs, candles with evenly spaced notches. As the flame burned down past each notch, a watcher could say, "A quarter of the candle has passed." And in some monasteries of medieval Europe, monks used these glowing clocks to guide prayers in the darkest hours of the night. Imagine the flicker of the flame, the silence of the stone halls, and the slow melting of wax, marking times. Flow. No ticking, no alarms, just the quiet patience of fire and water. Time in the stars when the sun dipped below the horizon. When fire and candlelight whispered in the dark, another great timekeeper took its place in the sky. The stars. Ancient people were astonishing observers of the heavens. They didn't have telescopes, but they had time and attention. Night after night they studied the patterns of the stars, the slow arc of constellations, the seasonal return of certain celestial companions. In Mesopotamia, the priests of Babylon tracked the stars not just to read the future, but to read the hours. The stars of the eastern horizon marked different times of night. The sky was their calendar, their clock. their map. In Egypt, great temple corridors were built to align with Sirius, the star whose return marked the coming of the Nile flood. In Polynesia, navigators used star positions to chart vast distances at sea. And across Europe, the night watch relied on the slow turning of the Big Dipper to mark hours during sleepless nights. In ancient China, special star clocks were drawn, showing which constellations appeared at what time. A simple glance upward told them whether it was the second hour or the fifth. Imagine lying beneath that vast, silent dome. No traffic, no city lights, only stars, gliding quietly through time, marking the day's calendars before clocks beyond hours and minutes. There was a deeper rhythm, the passage of days, seasons, and years. To live with the land, people needed to know when to plant, when to harvest, when the rains would come. So long before wall calendars or Google reminders, people built ancient systems to track time in long cycles. One of the oldest known calendars comes from Scotland at a site called Warren Field. There, over 10,000 years ago, people arranged pits in the earth that tracked the lunar cycle, marking the moon's monthly rhythm. In Egypt, the calendar began with the flooding of the Nile, heralded by the rising of Sirius. Their year had 12 months of 30 days each, with a few extra days set aside for celebration. The Maya, with astonishing precision, calculated lunar eclipses and created a calendar that could predict astronomical events centuries in advance. Their sacred Sukan cycle spun in 260-day rhythms. Their solar hop cycle ran 365 days. Together, these wheels of time turned like the gears of the universe. To the Maya, time was sacred, not just something to measure, but something to honor. Festivals, rituals, and rest days were all aligned to cosmic rhythms. Time was not a cage. It was a circle, a flowing current, connecting the stars, the earth, and the soul. As we drift gently forward in time, we arrive at the early medieval monasteries of Europe, where time began to be divided not by the sun or stars, but by prayer. Monks lived by a rule, a rhythm of worship and work. Their days were marked by sacred hours known as the divine office, matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. Each had its moment. Each was welcomed by the gentle tolling of a bell. These were not harsh alarms, but slow, resonant sounds echoing through stone halls. The bell called not just for time, but for peace, for stillness, for stepping away from daily tasks to remember something higher. And in those monasteries, a new kind of clock was born, not to rush, but to remind. Some were bell towers with levers. Others used water clocks to drop tiny hammers that rang small chimes. The focus was never precision, but rhythm, balance, quiet intervals between the noise of the world. Imagine hearing a single bell, ringing softly over the hills, calling you not to hurry but to pause. Time by trade, markets, horns, and town cries in bustling medieval towns, where merchants sold bread and wool, and farmers walked miles to sell their grain. Time became a public affair. People needed to know when the market opened, when the gates would close, when it was time to gather or disperse. But most still didn't own any kind of timepiece, so cities created their own rhythms. In many places, horns were blown to mark parts of the day, a deep note for dawn, a higher one for midday, a short, sharp burst before curfew. In Islamic cities, the call to prayer echoed from minarets 5 times a day, a sacred rhythm shared by the entire city. In Europe, town criers walked the streets, not only to share news, but to announce the time. They might call out, 6th hour past dawn, or 1st hour of nightfall. Over time, public mechanical clocks began to appear in towers, not precise, but visible and loud. And so, time became communal, not a number on a screen, but a song in the air, a voice on the wind, a shared rhythm under a common sky. Time in flow, the Chinese water clock. Let us now turn our attention to the East, to the scholarly courts and ancient observatories of imperial China, a civilization that held time as a sacred science and a gift from heaven. The Chinese did not simply observe the passage of hours, they studied it, calculated it, perfected it. As early as the Han Dynasty, around 2,000 years ago, they were using intricately designed water clocks. Some were simple vessels that dripped at a steady rate, but others, especially during the Tang and Song dynasties, became masterpieces of engineering. They were called clepsydra, and they operated with an elegant system of water flow, tipping buckets, rotating wheels, and even gears made of bronze and wood. In the 11th century, the great polymath Su Song built a monumental water clock tower over 30 feet high, used water to power an armillary sphere, rotating celestial maps, and mechanical puppets that struck bells and drums to mark the passing time. It was not just a timekeeper. It was a wonder, a harmony of heaven and earth. And to those who stood beneath its gentle chimes, each moment felt like a drop of water, measured, delicate, and flowing. Time through scent. The Japanese incense clocklets linger now in the hush of a Japanese temple, where monks and scholars once marked time not by the sun, nor by a shadow, nor by the chime of metal, but by fragrance. This was the incense clock, an invention both subtle and poetic, used in the Tenji-influenced courts of ancient Japan and China, but refined in Japanese Zen temples and noble houses. These timekeepers told time through the slow, consistent burning of a specially crafted incense trail. Powdered incense would be arranged into intricate shapes, perhaps a coil, or a zigzag line on a tray of ash. The incense would burn slowly, and as the glowing tip moved along the path, it would reach small markers, or sometimes colored powders, indicating the passing of time. Some incense clocks even burned tiny threads of silk that caused miniature bells to chime as the fire passed, and so, time became scented. It became the soft waft of sandalwood, the warm trace of the presence of the present moment. To sit beside such a clock was to be reminded that time isn't just something we see, it's something we breathe in, sense, and live within. Time in the village, life without numbers even, as mechanical clocks slowly spread across towns and cities. Most rural people, farmers, shepherds, fishermen, still lived by older rhythms. They didn't own timepieces, and they didn't need them. In villages across Europe, Asia, and Africa, time was known by the world itself. The rooster's crow marked morning, the long shadow on the church wall said it was noon. The cold wind in the trees told of evening. Children came home when the light turned golden. Meals were eaten when the bell in your belly rang. Sleep came not by the hour, but by the end of stories whispered near the hearth. Seasons brought their own schedule. You didn't check a calendar to know when spring arrived. You saw the buds, heard the birds, and smelled the rain on soil. Time flowed with your animals, with your crops, with the rhythms passed down by grandparents who had never needed a clock to tell them when to rest. To them, every moment had meaning, not because it was 3:45 p.m., but because it felt like the right time. The arrival of bells and towers. In towns and cities, the rhythm of life grew more complicated. Markets needed schedules, guilds needed order, churches needed bells to guide the faithful. So, tall towers were built first by churches, then by towns. These towers held mechanical clocks that rang bells to divide the day into parts, sometimes every hour, sometimes every quarter. The earliest tower clocks had no faces. They simply rang, letting everyone, even those without timepieces, know what time it was. By the 14th century, clock towers had become common in parts of Italy, Germany, and England, each one slightly different, each one an experiment in gears and hammers and wheels. They were symbols of civic pride, of progress, and slowly, they began to turn time into something public, measured, and regular. But even then, people still lived slowly. The ringing bell might remind you to start baking your bread, but it didn't rush you. There were no meetings at 3:15 sharp, no deadlines on a screen, just the slow chiming of hours guiding the quiet rhythm of the day. Time before timepieces, a soft ending. And now, dear listener, we've wandered gently through the ways time was once kept, not by hands of metal nor numbers on a glowing screen, but by water and fire, by stars and bells, by wind and birdsong, by breath and stillness and light. You've heard of incense clocks that smelled the hours, of monks rising at midnight to whisper prayers, of shepherds who watched the sun as their only guide. And maybe now, as your eyes begin to grow heavy, you'll think of time not as something you must chase, but something that flows gently around you. You don't need to measure this moment, just feel it, the softness of your blanket, the stillness of the air, the comfort of knowing that nothing needs doing, and no one needs anything from you. Let your thoughts drift, like candle smoke. Let time slow to the pace of breath. You've returned to a time before clocks. Sleep well, dream gently, and let the stars keep watch. Let's now set sail. Imagine standing on the deck of a wooden ship, your hands resting on the rail, as waves rise and fall beneath a deep blue sky. For centuries, sailors were among the most careful keepers of time, and yet they had no clocks aboard. Instead, they watched the stars, they studied the wind, they listened to the rhythm of the sea, and most of all, they used a simple, reliable tool, the sandglass, not an hourglass, exactly, though similar. These were smaller, faster versions, often set for 30 minutes. The sand would pour through a narrow neck from one bulb to the other, measuring not hours, but watches, segments of time for shifts and duties aboard ship. Every 30 minutes, a sailor would flip the glass, and someone would strike a bell once, twice, up to 8 bells in a shift. That's why you still hear of 8 bells at sea, the end of a 4-hour watch. No gears, no ticking hands, just sand and sea. And bell. At night sailors looked upward. The stars were not just beautiful, they were lifelines. The North Star told them which way was home. The rising of specific stars hinted at time. Sailors from Polynesia, Europe, Arabia, and Africa all read the heavens like ancient scrolls. The ocean was their world, and the stars their only guide. Time by footsteps, the travelers clock long before smartphones with GPS, before watches, on wrists or clocks in train stations. People still knew how long a journey would take, but how the answer was in their feet. In many cultures, especially in ancient Rome, Greece, and across the Islamic world, travelers and messengers measured time in paces, milestones and shadows. For example, Roman roads were lined with milestones, not just to tell distances, but to let travelers estimate how many hours they would walk. They might say, the next village is 3 hours walk, not miles, not kilometers, but hours, based on human movement. Desert travelers, especially in nomadic Arab and Berber tribes, measured time by how many steps it took to wear out a camel, or how far the shadow stretched by mid-journey. In medieval Japan, were carried weighted markers that measured time by how far they swung while walking at a steady pace. Even drummers walked ahead of royal caravans, setting a beat for footsteps, so that travel time could be synchronized. Imagine walking slowly, through mountain passes, your only sense of time, the setting sun, the rhythm of boots, and the silence between birdsong. Time in festivals and folklore across the world, people didn't always need clocks to know when something special was near. They simply watched, and listened. Seasons spoke through the land. The cherry blossom told of spring, the harvest moon whispered of autumn. The sound of migrating birds meant winter was not far behind. Many ancient calendars were shaped by festivals, cyclical celebrations that returned year after year, reminding people where they were in time, not by numbers, but by ritual. In ancient Celtic lands, festivals like Beltane and Samhain marked key turning points, the beginning of light or darkness. People lit fires, sang songs, and told stories to welcome the new rhythm. In India, the movement of constellations like Orion signaled festivals like Makar Sankranti, as kites soared into skies that once guided farmers and priests alike. In Africa, drum circles marked seasons of planting and harvest, not as alarms, but as invitations. Come, it's time. Time to gather, time to dance, time to rest. This was time as feeling, as memory, as music, time beneath the ground, cave timekeeping and the dark sometimes. To understand time, people didn't look to the sky. They went underground. In ancient caves across Europe and Africa, researchers have discovered patterns, paintings of moons and animals drawn in rhythm, a mark every day, a cycle every 28 nights. Long before writing, someone, deep in a cave, was watching the passage of days. Perhaps they felt the moon's pull, perhaps they tracked menstruation, migration, or weather. Whatever the reason, they made time visible in chalk, ash, and ochre. In underground temples in Malta and Sardinia, chambers were built to align with the light of only 2 days each year, solstice chambers. On that single morning, light would fall through a shaft, illuminating the dark, a signal that time had turned. These were not places of rush or counting. They were sacred spaces, where time wasn't broken into hours, but marked with wonder. Time through sound, drums, bells, and birdsong. Before the tick of clocks echoed in rooms, before alarm tones and phone reminders, people listened to the world. Time often came not as a number, but as a sound. In many African and Southeast Asian societies, drums were used to tell time. Each rhythm signaled something: the start of a workday, the call to a council, the gathering of harvesters. In Buddhist temples across East Asia, bells rang at dawn and dusk, marking the slow inhale and exhale of daily life. Some bells were so large they echoed for miles. Others were small, struck softly, guiding silent monks through meditation. And long before clocks told you to wake, the birds did. The first song of the lark, the crow of the rooster, the evening call of the owl, these were once the timekeepers of villages, each call a signpost on the quiet road through the day. People knew their world not just by light, but by what it sounded like. A world where time was not measured, but heard. Time in the body, the rhythm within. Not all time came from the outside world. Sometimes time lived within us. Long before science named them circadian rhythms, people already knew their bodies had clocks. They rose with the light, felt hunger at certain moments, grew tired as the shadows stretched. Farmers often said, "My body tells me when it's time to rest," or "I always wake before the rooster." And they did. Midwives knew the natural pace of birth. Healers listened to the pulse to measure not just health, but timing. In some ancient Chinese medical practices, each organ of the body was said to have its own hour when its energy peaked. The lungs ruled the dawn, the heart ruled mid-morning, the kidneys governed twilight. In this way, the body was not just alive, it was a clock, a quiet one, ticking not with gears, but with breath, and heartbeat, and dreams. Time and silence, monks, hermits, and solitude. Imagine now a small hut on a mountainside. No clock, no bell, no candle. Just wind, trees, and silence. For some monks, hermits, ascetics, time was not something to track. It was something to leave behind. In the deserts of early Christianity, monks known as the Desert Fathers lived in caves and huts, praying by the rising and setting of the sun. In Tibet, hermits sat in snowy caves for months or years, measuring time not in days, but in the number of breaths between dawn and darkness. In medieval Europe, some anchorites lived walled inside small cells next to churches, content to let bells mark the hours as they sat in devotion for them. Time was not a ladder, it was a pool, deep still, eternal. And in that stillness, they found a rhythm that no clock could measure. Time as story, memory, and the mind. Finally, let's turn inward, because perhaps the most mysterious clock of all is the one that lives in the mind. Time is not always even. A moment of joy can fly. A moment of pain can stretch endlessly. A childhood summer feels long, but a quiet evening slips by like mist. Before clocks ruled the world, people marked time through stories. They remembered years as the winter the river froze over, the season my daughter was born, the night the sky turned red. This was time not by seconds, but by meaning. In many indigenous cultures, elders still tell time this way. 3 moons ago, 2 summers back, since the last great fire. Time as lived memory. Time as tale. And perhaps, as you lie here now, drifting between wake and sleep, you too feel that soft, sliding sense of time, the kind that needs no numbers, only dreams. Time in the fields, the farmer's clock for countless generations. Time began not with a bell, but with the land itself. The fields were clocks. The soil held secrets of seasons. The wheat whispered of change. Farmers woke with the dew. They watched shadows grow across crops. A soft breeze carried the scent of ripening barley. The sun arched slowly above, not measured in hours, but in light angles and golden warmth. Lambing season, first frost, the return of swallows, all told the farmer what the clock could not. In this slow, earthy world, time wasn't kept, it was felt. Time by candle, wax and wick in dark stone rooms lit by flame. People once kept time through melting candles. Some were marked with metal pins or rings. As the wax burned, the pin fell, ting, reminding monks of midnight prayer. Others marked the hours with lines. Each waxy fall another quiet measure of night. In old China and Japan, some candles were fragranced for each hour, subtle shifts of scent as time passed in perfume. Time here was soft, flickering, a golden hush in darkness. And as the flame danced, so did time itself, delicate, glowing, and slow. Time in the marketplace. Echoes of trade step into an old-world market, not just a place of commerce, but a calendar of the senses. Markets opened with sunrise and closed at sunset. Certain traders only came during certain moon phases, or near harvest festivals. Market sounds were timekeepers. The morning shouts of bread sellers, the mid-morning clang of fishmongers, and the lazy hum of siesta afternoons. 2 villagers. Market days were reference points. I saw him the last barley fair. She returned to spice markets ago. Time was transactional, traded in goods, smelled in spices, tasted in fresh peaches, and remembered with a smile. Time by the heavens, watching the sky above the noise and bustle. Time glided silently across the sky. Ancient astronomers, in Babylon, Egypt, and India watched the stars like scholars. The morning star, the rise of Orion, the position of the moon in a soft purple dusk. Temple priests in Central America tracked the equinoxes with sacred precision. Stone windows framed the sun's journey. They needed no clocks. The heavens told all when to plant, when to feast, when to mourn. Time written not in ink, but in starlight. Time through ritual, the sacred hours across cultures. Time was sacred. People prayed at dawn, at dusk, with a ringing of bells or call to prayer. In Christian monasteries, monks followed the divine office, praying 8 times a day. Lauds prime Tursk, each hour a thread in the fabric of sacred time. Muslim communities were called to prayer by the adhan, echoing from minarets at 5 exact points of the day. In Hindu temples, priests offered water, fire, and incense, marking sunrise and sunset. Time here was devotion, a turning wheel of reverence and return. Time in the shadows, sun and stone structures, crafted by ancient hands, marked time with astonishing grace. The great sundials of ancient empires cast long, perfect shadows across marble. In Peru, the Incas' Intihuatana stone held the sun in sacred stillness. At Stonehenge, the rising sun splits stones on solstice mornings, a moment of awe and ancient astronomy. To these builders, shadows weren't empty, they were language. Each shift told a story, each movement a whisper. From the cosmos, time through travel journeys as measured before trains or watches, travel itself measured time. A journey from one village to the next might take half a day by foot, or a full moon cycle by camel caravan. Sailors spoke of weeks at sea, measured, not in hours, but in sunsets and squalls. Pilgrimages lasted seasons. Nomads marked their paths by stars and mountains. Time was the road beneath your feet, each step a second, each pause a page. Time at sea, stars and swells out on the open sea. Time had no clocks. The North Star guided sailors by night. The sun's peak told them noon, that they marked time by the ship's bell. Every half-hour shift rung in rhythm, that sandglasses turned by sailors tracked watches and tides. The sea had its own rhythm, the turn of waves, the swell of wind, the lull of distant thunder. Out there, time rocked gently, as endless as the horizon. Time in the village, a shared rhythm. Villagers moved as one. Children ran when bells rang. Meals came with the midday sun. A mother knew when to call her children, not by clock, but by the warmth in the air. The blacksmith's clang marked mid-morning. Evening songs echoed at dusk. Time here was communal, held together in footsteps, voices, firelight. No one needed to ask the hour, they felt it in their bones, and in the hearts of those around them.